Going to stop, right? I got these glasses. I got my new glasses this week. It's hard to tell. I get them all. I keep them pretty much the same. You really can't tell that they are new glasses. They're brand new glasses. Theoretically, they tint when the sun's out. But I really can't. I don't know whether to send them back or not because I've not been able to get them to tint at all because I can't find the sun. So hopefully I'll find out sometime in the next few days that these are in fact tinting glasses, but I don't know right now. So anyway, that was free. All right. As you probably know if you've been coming here recently, we've been pushed throughout the entire month of February. There's a ministry in our area called 5 and 2. It's a food pantry. Takes care of the needs of a lot of people in our area who have food challenges. And they have gone on some hard times. And we pledged that we were going to try to raise $1,000 a month from our church, just from our church through partnerships with them. And I knew you'd do it, and you did. We had well over $800 a month pledged, just perpetuity. I'm a speaker who does this in public all the time, don't worry. And we had well over $1,000 given as one-time donations, which over the course of the year means we went past $1,000 a month. So if you want to give yourselves a hand for doing just an incredible job of that, I knew you could do it. I know you would do it too, because this church steps up and says we're going to help people out there whenever we get a chance. And which leads me to something that we sometimes can miss because we do such a good job out there. We knew when we started that push, it was a really lousy time for us to do it. Because anytime we start pushing to really hard for people to give outside the church, the giving inside the church is going to drop a little bit because we're focused there. And we were already in a budget, not good space anyway, but it said, no, they need it worse than we do, so we pushed really hard for a month. And now, if you guys wouldn't mind giving to us, we'd be really cool with that, and everything. And, if you got an income tax refund and you want to share and be nice, we like that. Seriously, if you've been coming a little bit and you haven't started giving regularly, that's part of the discipline of being a follower of Christ. Just so you know, we're very private about that. We don't check on anybody's giving. I don't know what anybody gives but my wife and I, and she might be sneaking some money in that I don't know about. Okay, but we do encourage you as part of your own spiritual development to make giving part of your disciplines. And so encourage you to pick that up if you haven't been recently, just so you know, because we'll let you know when we're challenged. And we're challenged right now. It happens once in a while. We're really good at spending money. We don't spend it much here, but we spend it all over the place. Anyway, all right, starting a brand new series today, and we just want to tell you the title. You're going to be excited. You're going to go, wow, this is great. Series called Word2. We're going to talk about words. This is a vocabulary series. Aren't you glad you came? This is not a philosophy series, which you sometimes get. Next week, we're going to do math, but today we're going to vocab. Now, if you hang around church, if you hang around Christians, there are certain words that get thrown around, and a challenge we face as a church is we're weird. And most churches have a tendency to have people in their church who've been in a church like theirs for a long, long time. There aren't many churches like ours, so there's not many people who've been in a church like ours for a long, long time. And we attract people from just all over the spectrum. We've got people here who were raised in very, very almost fundamentalist churches. We've got people who were raised in very, very mainstream, mainline churches. We've got former Catholics. We've got people who still consider themselves Catholic. We've got atheists, agnostic. We've got the whole bunch. So we can't assume that you know what words mean. And some of the words are so big, and even those who've been around may have forgotten. So we're going to take a few weeks, and we're going to talk about some of the big words when it comes to Christianity. Some of the words, I'm going to explain them and teach them, and trust me, this will not be boring very much. Say hardly any, no more than 10, 15 minutes at a stretch, boring. Okay? So today's word, the word of the day, is temple. And if you think about it, you've heard the word temple. If you've been in church any, you've heard the word temple. If you follow the life of Jesus, if you're just going through the Gospels, the books of the Bible about Jesus, you'll find him interacting with the temple, talking about the temple, going to the temple. Every time he goes to the capital city of Jerusalem, which is a lot, he's going to be interacting with the temple. If you go to the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, you're going to find him talking constantly about the temple. And it's important that we know and understand what in the world, when they say temple, what are they talking about? Well, to start with, it didn't start with a temple. The temple was something that came about over time. Because there was this dude named Abraham. And Abraham, God has seen how screwed up the world is, and he says, I'm going to fix this. And I'm going to fix it through a person, and I'm going to take that person, I'm going to raise that person up with their descendants to become a nation. Through that nation, I'm going to give them Jesus Christ, or we're going to fix this. And so God calls a man named Abram, and he says, I want you to go to the promised land, what I'm going to call the promised land, and we're going to make you into that great nation. And in Genesis 12 is where this occurs. And he says to him, a very important thing to Abram, says, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. In other words, Abraham, I'm going to call you up, raise you up, and then we're going to fix the whole planet. We're going to bless people everywhere. And Abraham's response in verse 5, it says, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And the first step in the process is an altar. And an altar is where someone would come out in just an open area, and they'd stack some rocks up, and they'd worship God. A lot of times it would involve a sacrifice of some type, maybe an animal, maybe just wine or something, but they'd sacrifice and they just worship God. And it was kind of cool because it was very personal. The problem with an altar is that Abraham was just like us. He was a screwed up sinner. He did things that were wrong. He did them a lot, and he just kept going back. Okay? And that sin separates us from God, and that little altar didn't do anything to fix that. You could worship God, but he was still separated from God. And so the next stage, God brings up a guy named Moses, and he starts a nation, the nation that we would call Israel, and he puts them together, and he says they need a bunch of rules and regulations. They need how to fix this. And a key central part of that was what they called the tabernacle. It means tent. And the tabernacle would be a place that had a few differences there. Number one, it was kind of a fixed structure. It was mobile. They could tear it down and move it all the time they wanted to. It was light, portable. They'd run around with it all over the wilderness. But it had at its very heart, it had a section where God had told them, okay, if you do this sin, you need to do this sacrifice. Okay? If you commit sin X, you need to sacrifice a goat. Sin Y will get you a dove. Sin Z will get you, an elephant. What? No, they didn't do elephants. That would be one heck of a sin, wouldn't it? That would be some serious sin right there. That's an elephant sin, dude. But so they had that going on. There were a couple problems, though. Every time they'd fix one problem, it fixed the forgiveness problem, it seemed to create two more. And one of the ones that came up immediately with the tabernacle was they had to build this curtain wall around it so people didn't just accidentally wander into it. And so the tabernacle separated people from God at a very small level with the sheets. But in the very middle of it, there was the holiest place, and nobody went in there very, very often, like once a year kind of thing. And they took a really amazing tapestry and they hung it right in the gate, right in the doorway. And that tapestry blocked people from getting to God. Only one person could ever go past that sheet, and he could only do it like once a year. So the tabernacle did better with forgiveness, but it blocked people from God. And it also, here's what the book of Hebrews says about the tabernacle system. The old system under the law of Moses, the tabernacle system, was only a shadow, a dim preview of the good things to come, not the good things themselves. It's God's working toward it. The people are getting there, but it's got some negatives. And the biggest negative, in addition to blocking people, was in Hebrews. It says this: the sacrifices under that system were repeated again and again, year after year, but they were never able to provide perfect cleansing for those who came to worship. What's that mean? Okay? Commit sin, go to the tabernacle, make a sacrifice. Commit sin, go to the tabernacle, make a sacrifice. You're a dude, I'm a dude, I'll just use this one. You're a dude, and Jesus said if you look at a woman in a way that's sexual at a certain level, that's the same as adultery, and that's a sin. So dude comes, sees the woman, okay, gets his dove or whatever the sacrifice, goes to the temple, sacrifices the dove, walks out of the temple. Wow, she looks crap. Okay, so it was a repetitive, it only worked for a little bit, and as soon as you were done with it, you were back. And it was just, it was a revolving door of trying to get forgiveness. So it was better than nothing, but it had some problems. Well, the nation of Israel finally settles down. They get stable. They develop a capital city. They've got a king. They're no longer moving around. They don't really need the portable tabernacle anymore. And a king named David comes along, and David is living in this nice palace. And he says, you know what, right now I'm living in a palace of wood and stone, and God is living in that tent out front. He says, that's probably not right. We should build him a temple. The word temple literally means house. Okay? So God needs his own house. So they came together and they built the temple. And it was much bigger. It was stone. It had some advantages. It didn't blow away when the wind got strong. But they took the tabernacle design, brought it in, but there were still negatives. There were still problems. For one thing, whereas the original tabernacle had a curtain around the outside, just a sheet that blocked people from God, what do you think a temple would have to block people from God? Big, old, heavy stone walls. Okay? So not only are they blocked from God, but they did another thing. In making the temple, they also blocked people from people. They built the temple, and when you came to the temple, there would be an outer area with a big stone wall. You go through the doors, and this area is where Gentiles can come, people who are not Jews, most of us. And they were allowed into the court of the Gentiles. They weren't allowed in the next court over, which was the court of the women, which is where women Jews could come. And the women Jews were not allowed the next court over, which was the court of the men, which where male Jews could go. And the male Jews were not, for the most part, allowed in the next court over, which was the court of the priests, where the real high religious dudes could go. And all of those guys couldn't go into the Holy of Holies except one of them. He had to go past that big, thick curtain they had in the tabernacle. They brought it with them, and they had this huge tapestry curtain, and in that was the Holy of Holies. And only one dude got to go in there, and that was like once a year. And so it separated people from God. It also separated people from people. And frankly, a whole bunch of other stuff. You know, when you got that much going on and that much official stuff, there's room for lots and lots of messing the system up, lots of corruption. They started realizing that, you know what? You shouldn't be able to bring your own sheep to a sacrifice because your sheep may not be pure enough. You shouldn't be able to bring your own dove, your own goat. You shouldn't, not even your own money. Because here at the temple, we only take dollars, so don't be showing up with euros. Okay? No, we only take this. So how do we get people to have the right kind of sheep and the right kind of goat and the right kind of dove? Well, we'll have to raise them and sell them ourselves. And so they developed this whole system where they were turning a huge profit because in order to make a sacrifice, you commit the sin, you need to go to Jerusalem, you need to sacrifice a dove. You don't have a dove, you can't just go out in the wild and catch a dove. You have to have a special kind of dove. So they would have a salesman, and the salesman would sell you this overpriced dove that you could go in. And it was kind of like used cars. You could bring your own dove, and they'd trade it in, but it would depreciate a lot as soon as you pulled it off the lot. Because everything was jacked up, the prices are jacked up, and they're just taking advantage of people. There's this hierarchy. It's really kind of a mess. And at the end, by the time we got to the temple, when Jesus shows up, here the temple was basically a place where faith was limited to a specific people. Only Jews were really allowed to come to Christ, or not to Christ, to God. And matter of fact, if you were a Gentile and you wanted to come to God, step one, become a Jew. Ethnically, try to mimic the Jews, try to live like a Jew. That's step one, is try to become like that people. Because other people, they're not allowed here. It was also limited to a specific place. There's only one place you can sacrifice, that's that temple. That temple is on a specific hill in Jerusalem, a specific city. That's the only place you can get to God because this is now called the house of God. So God lives here. To get to God, you have to go to that specific place. So the specific people in a specific place, and it's still got that messed up, ineffective sacrificial system where you're just on a conveyor belt continuously going back and forth to God. And then Jesus shows up. You know, Jesus is the one who told Abraham, he and God were the ones who told Abraham, going to bless all the nations through you. And now we got a place where there's a special court for those people. And Jesus shows up. And the whole of their faith revolved around that building. Everything about Judaism at that point was about that building. Every time they went in, the people pointed, look at that, isn't that awesome? Because Herod had taken the temple and he made it just a huge, spectacular thing. Gold and stone and precious wood, and it was amazing. And so one day, close to the end of his earthly life, Jesus was walking in the temple area. And in Matthew 24, as Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him the various temple buildings. Isn't this awesome, Jesus? Isn't it amazing what God's done through it? Isn't this an amazing place for God to live? But he responded, do you see all those buildings? Yeah. I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of another. That whole temple thing, I'm tearing it down. I'm bringing the whole thing to the ground. It'll be completely level. You can put a baseball field in here if you want to, because it's going to be flat. And they're going, Jesus, our whole faith revolves around that building. And Jesus gone, no, flat. Matter of fact, they didn't know it, but Jesus had already started the process of tearing it down. There was I told you about there was the court where the Gentiles could come. And then I told you about how you had to buy your dove and your goat and your sheep and all your stuff special. Where are you going to put that store at? Where are you going to put the mall so the people can come in and buy the right goat and the right sheep and the right doves and exchange their money so they had the right kind of money? Where are you going to put that at in this temple? The court of the Gentiles. It's the outermost place. When you come in, we'll put our little bazaar, our flea market here. Literally a flea market. They had sheep, so there were fleas. And they made it so Gentiles couldn't even come in to their part of the temple. What do you think about what Jesus would think about that? Jesus is the one who said, I'm going to bless all nations through you, Abraham. There's a theological term for the emotion Jesus went through when he came into the temple area and he saw that Gentiles couldn't come to God. The theological term is pissed off. And I'm not sure how else to say it, when somebody actually takes ropes, makes a whip from the ropes, and drives everybody out of that region, throws their tables over, and is whipping them out of the building because, why? They're blocking the people who are far from God from getting to God. And Jesus starts this destruction of the temple by clearing out that outer court, the court of the Gentiles. He continues destroying it when he gets on the cross. In Matthew 27, it says that Jesus was, as he's on the cross, when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice from the cross, he gave up his spirit. And at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Remember that curtain I was telling you about, the one that separates the holiest place, that really fancy tapestry curtain? As Jesus dies, he screams. As he screams, it splits that curtain right down the middle so that anybody can get to God symbolically. He's destroying the temple. And then God's not done, because this temple has gotten so far off course. It started out as a picture of the holy thing. It started out as something good. It has become something so far from what God wants that God decides he's just not going to let it sit there anymore. You know, Jesus said, I'm going to tear it down so no stones are sitting on top of each other. That's the next thing that happens. The Romans come through. And God loves to use nations who don't think they're following God to do his stuff for him. He uses Babylonians. He uses just all these different nations. He uses Assyrians, the Medes, Persians. He's always using them. So the Romans come through and they destroy the Temple Mount. They knock it down so literally no stone is standing on another. But God's pretty smart. He knows us pretty well. He knows how stubborn we are. And he says, if I just leave it flat like that, you know what's going to happen? They're going to rebuild it. They'll probably make it bigger and fancier and even harder for people to get to who need God. So God's using nations. In about 636 AD, about 600 years after Jesus, he sends another group of people in, the Muslim Arabs. You may have heard of them. And they take over the whole area. Now, I don't know if you've heard that. This is something that you have to really study political science to get this right. But the Muslim Arabs tend to not get along with Jews. I don't know if you've picked up on that from the news, but there is a tendency for them not. So God sends in the group who most does not want Jews here and puts them in charge of that whole area. And says, I'm sorry, you can't get in here to build a temple. And then he goes, they're stubborn. They are stubborn. They're going to sneak in. They're going to figure something out. So, in 691 AD, the Muslims build the Dome of the Rock. You've seen it. It's that gold dome that you see in all the pictures of Jerusalem, and that's a Muslim shrine that is sitting on the exact spot of the temple. It is sitting right where the temple is supposed to go. It is the place where you're supposed to do sacrifices for God. And the gold dome is sitting right on top of that. And if somebody were to try to build a temple on that spot, we're talking World War III, that moment. So God says, oh, no. Now, you guys have messed this temple up. I'm going to flatten it. I'm going to give the property to people who hate you. And then I'm going to put a building on top of it as a seal to make sure you don't rebuild this puppy. Because I got something totally different in mind, and I'm not going to let you screw this one up. So the temple is gone. For all and purposes for us, it ain't coming back. Why? Because we don't need it anymore. Remember, the temple had really two big purposes. It was messing both of them up, but it had two purposes. One was to help us gain forgiveness so we could gain access to God. And the second was so we would gain access to God. So we'd be forgiven and have a way back to God. And while Jesus was tearing down one temple, he was becoming the real one. See, in place of that building, God substituted himself. Don't believe it's in Hebrews chapter 9. It says, under the old system, the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer could cleanse people's bodies from ceremonial impurity. But just think how much more the blood of Christ will purify our consciences from sinful deeds so that we can worship the living God. For by the power of the eternal Spirit, Christ offered himself to God as a perfect sacrifice for our sins. That is why he is the one who mediates a new covenant between God and people. So that all who are called can receive the eternal, how long does this inheritance last? Eternal, how long is that? Does that mean you don't have to turn around and go right back into the temple for another sacrifice? Is that what that means? That means that I mess up, I ask God to forgive, and it's done? I don't have to go back? That's kind of cool. Can receive the eternal inheritance God has promised them, for Christ died to set them free from the penalty of the sins they committed under the first covenant. So Jesus, instead of being a single lamb or a single bull that could die for a single set of sins, Jesus took all the sins humanity has ever committed on himself, and he paid the penalty for every one of them at the same time on the cross. Jesus Christ became the temple. He became the sacrifice in the temple. And so on the cross, Jesus became the temple, where he sacrificed the permanent offering of himself. Which means, that's the introduction. Now, ready for the sermon? The temple is no longer needed for forgiveness. We don't need a building. Jesus handled all that. One page later in Hebrews, chapter 10, it says this, our high priest, who is Jesus, offered himself to God as a single sacrifice for sins, good for all time. It's a lifetime pass. Then he sat down in the place of honor at God's right hand. For that, by that one offering, he forever made perfect those who are being made holy. That last phrase I'm going to get back to in a minute or two. So we don't need a temple. We've got access to God. We've got forgiveness. But where'd God go? I mean, the temple was the house of God. God's presence was in the temple. If the temple is gone, where is God's presence? Because that's kind of what we want. We want to be with God. We want to be in God's presence. Where do we go to find God's presence now if there's not a temple, if there's not a house, if there's not even an altar? Where do we go? We don't go anywhere. 1 Corinthians 6, Paul says, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God? God moves from a building to us. Now, let me clarify that a little bit, because I think we miss it because we're such individualistic people. We Americans, we just love I, me, I, me, I, me. But let me show you another verse. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? Okay? The temple is no longer a place. It's a people. We are the temple. It's true that God lives in each one of us. But how did Jesus say it? Where 2 or 3 or more are gathered in my name, there am I among them. So while it's true that God's Spirit lives in each of us, it's even more true that God's Spirit lives in all of us. We together are the temple of God on earth. We are the place where you can come into the presence of God. I mean, God lives in me personally, and I have that. But when I come into the fellowship, when I come into the community of faith, God is here. God is with us. Like, that's kind of cool. One more piece. The temple is no longer about exclusion, but inclusion. See, here's how the temple worked. Remember all the walls? The wall meant that if you were a Gentile and you'd been working really hard at it, you could get into this section. But you couldn't get where the women were. If you were a good Jewish woman, you could get to here, but you couldn't get to where the Jewish men went. If you're a good Jewish man, you could still not get to where the priests are. It's about exclusion. But Jesus, according to Ephesians, Paul says, so in him, through him, you Gentiles, that'd be most of us, that means non-Jew, are also being made part of this dwelling where God lives by his Spirit. To carry the picture farther, there is the temple, and every time a person comes to a relationship with Christ, every time a person accepts what Jesus did for them on the cross, there's an addition to the temple. And you are brought in and you are a room added to God's temple. I find that kind of cool. What that means is, instead of us striving to become worthy to enter God's presence, God comes into our presence and undertakes the task of making us worthy, which stands religion on its head, right? Because the whole Jewish system was, if I become worthy enough through sacrificing, through not defiling myself in any way, I can work my way into God's presence, and the moment I fail, I go back out of God's presence. So God's presence is over there, and I'm over here trying to get there. But what did God do? God went from there to here in Jesus, and he stays here. Okay? One of the best ways to picture this, to picture the whole distinction of how things changed, how Jesus just turned everything on its head, is there's a story in the Bible, in the New Testament, about Jesus, and Jesus is standing there, and a leper comes up to him. A leper has serious skin diseases. And there was one real big rule about lepers. Don't touch them. Okay? Now, we think, because we're modern Westerners, we think that means because you'll catch leprosy. Leprosy is not that easy to catch. That wasn't the problem for Jews. It wasn't about catching leprosy. It was about catching their defilement. Because they were spiritually, religiously defiled. They weren't allowed to come into the presence of God because they were corrupt. They were dirty, spiritually dirty. And you wouldn't touch them, because if somebody was dirty, this is the whole point of a lot of Leviticus and all the law in the Old Testament, is you don't touch something that's dirty, because touching something that's dirty makes you dirty. The dirty creeps up. The defilement would creep up your arm. You don't touch the one that's defiled. You don't touch a defiled piece of cloth. You don't touch a defiled piece of a building. You definitely don't touch a leper or another defiled person. You never touch the defiled, because the defiled will make you dirty. And this leper comes and stands before the rabbi Jesus. And Jesus reaches out and touches him. And all his followers freaked out. Oh my gosh, we're following the rabbi. The rabbi's now dirty. He's now defiled. He has touched the leper. The leper's dirty has crawled onto Jesus. Jesus is now defiled. We can't touch Jesus. Jesus is done because he has touched that which is defiled. That's the old way of looking at it. But Jesus flipped it on its head, and something really amazing happened. Instead of the evil coming out of the leper and defiling Jesus, the holiness poured out of Jesus into the leper and cleansed him. That's a whole new ballgame right there. That just turns everything on its head, because no longer is it about us trying to get to God by being good enough. It's about God coming to us and pouring his good into us. And it changes everything about us. It changes everything about how we do things. Because now, I don't have to worry if you're all messed up. Matter of fact, I can be all messed up. We can all be all screwed up. Because our job isn't to keep away from the ones who are messed up and will defile us. Our job is to seek out the ones who are dirty and messed up and would defile us, because we bring the holiness of God with us, because we are the temple of God. God's presence is in us, so when I enter a relationship, when I enter an encounter with another human being, it's not about them making me dirty, it's about me making them clean. And by the way, in case you hadn't figured out, that's why we do church the way we do church. The reason we just come just as you are. The reason we come and say, oh, whatever. You don't have to get better to get here. Matter of fact, you're better off if you don't try. Because if you're going to try to get better before you get here, you're just putting whitewash on something that's already dirty, and you're not cleaning it up. But if you come here just as dirty as you are, and you let God work from the inside out, he'll clean you from the inside out. Remember how to say that verse? He's making those he called holy. He is transforming us into the image of Jesus Christ. He is making us holy after he brings us in. And we do that with regular people too. We say, come on in here with us. We don't need you to clean up anything. This is so cool, because this happens to me at the gym or anywhere I go all the time. Somebody will be talking and they'll let out one of those words. They're like, oh, sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to. I know you were here. Okay. The church I pastor is 70% military. I have heard that word before. I know that one. I know how to use it in context. I know everything about, that's not the first time I've heard it. I know what it means. It's hopefully not the last time I hear it, to be really honest with you. Because I don't want people trying to clean themselves up on the outside so they can come into my presence any more than God says clean yourself up on the outside before you come into his presence. What I think is really cool is after people get to know me a little bit, they'll go back to cussing around me. They meet me and they're themselves. They don't, because I don't wear a Pastor Steve shirt. Okay, no. I don't want that. So they're just being themselves, and they find out I'm a pastor. So they're going, they're self-editing. And then they get used to Steve, and then they're back to themselves again. Which is exactly the way God calls us to be. Because I'm not judging whether or not you got yourself right. I'm still working to get me right. God's still working in me. And so anybody who wants to come in here can come in here. Welcome home. Welcome to the land of the screwed up people. We're in here. God is in our presence because we are the temple. We're not cleansing ourselves to get ready to be there. God's here. And God's going to work in you, and he's going to cleanse you, which is why we're always looking. How can we do an even better job? How can we reach even more people? How can we take this holiness of God to more people and more places? Let me give you a little update on something. A few weeks ago, we were talking about the Johnsonville and how we need to be reaching into that community among others. And we've already been talking about the bridge groups, where we're going to look for ways that we can build bridges between ourselves and people who may not feel they would be welcome here, and let them know that they are, and help them grow and become the people God designed them to be. And we got another one. I'm just going to announce it, and then we're going to I'll spell it out more in a few weeks. But as soon as we can make it work well, which hopefully won't be that long, we're going to start a Hispanic venue on campus. What that means is, while those of us who speak English best, I guess I'm in this group, will be over here. We're going to pick one of the modulars, one of the big ones, and we're going to have a Spanish service in there. The kids will all be together, but people who speak Spanish as their primary language will have a worship service there. They'll be the speakers. They'll be taking my message and translating not just the words, but the culture, being part of the teaching team, so they can communicate the message in a way that resonates with the people in that room with them. Have a Spanish language worship service, and we've got enough really good native Spanish speakers on our worship team that we can send a really good team over there. Not some little second rate, but a really good team. And they'll meet during one of the two services, and as soon as they fill that room up for one service, we'll put them at two services. And as soon as they fill both of those up, we'll start looking for a bigger place to put it. Because there are people who need Jesus. There are people who need what Jesus brings. And we're not supposed to say, well, that's a barrier we can't cross. Our job is to say, how can we cross it? How can we bridge it? How can we take Jesus to these people? And those people and those people. Because somewhere along the way, somebody decided they should bring Jesus to this people. And I'm really glad they did. And our job is to take that message and just keep. And we're not done. That's not the only two things we're doing. Those are the first two big things we're rolling out, that we're going to be doing, the bridge groups and that, where we're going to be reaching out and we're going to be impacting people and we're going to be bringing people in so God can work in them. Now, it may be that you're here and you've never had that relationship with Christ. Matter of fact, you may have never heard it presented this way before. And if you're ready to talk to somebody about having that relationship with Christ, not following a bunch of rules, not trying to earn your way to God, not trying to get clean enough for Him to accept you, but to walk into the arms of a God who loves you already just the way you are. If you'd like to talk to somebody, you grab one of these blue bags at the end of the service. There's on the ends of the platform, on the back tables. If you grab one of these bags, we've got people that are trained. They'll take about 10 minutes. They'll walk you through the contents of the bag and show you how to have that relationship with Christ. If you already have a relationship with Christ, but you've never announced it to the world, baptism is how we announce it to the world. We do baptism as the first Wednesday of every month. There's one coming up Wednesday. So if you want to be baptized this week, you better shoot that email to baptism@spoutsprings.org real soon, because got to talk to you a little bit first, okay? But don't worry, if you miss, we'll do it again next month. We like doing things over and over again because it helps people catch. So we do blue bags every week. We do baptism every month. And also every month we do our step classes. And step classes is how we help you grow into the person God designed you to be. And the step one class is tonight at 6 in the Steel Fortress, which is the cafe on the other side of the tent building. I teach that class, and we walk through what this church is about, how this church can help you grow into God's design for your life, the history of the church, all kinds of cool stuff. It's a fun hour. I enjoy it. I think you will too. Just show up. You don't have to register. You don't have to fill out any forms. If you got kids, we'll have childcare there. Just show up, take about an hour, get you started on the step classes to growing into the person God designed you to be. Also, it's possible that as I've been talking, or you just may have come in with something that you want to pray about. We've got a cross in the corner over there. And that's a place. During this next song, if you want to pray about anything, you just wander over there. Doesn't matter what it is you want to pray about. We're not checking you. You can go pray there. If you want to pray with somebody, we've got some people around the outside of the auditorium. Just approach one of them. They'd love to pray with you about anything. If you want to take communion, we've got a communion station, one in the back, one here in the front, to remind yourself of what Christ did for you on that cross. Okay, I got one more thing to say before I finish. I am pretty certain that for some of you to apply what you've learned today, it's going to rock your world. Because there are people here right now, I am sure of it, who every time you come to church, you feel unworthy. I'm sure there are people watching online. And when you come, one reason you watch online is because when you come to church, you feel unworthy. You feel like you don't belong here. Like everybody else is better than you. Can I give you something to take home with you to help you get rid of that fallacy out of your head that somehow everybody's better than you and you're not worthy to come to God? It's a reminder you'll see on the news on a regular basis. If you watch the news, they'll frequently have a story about Jerusalem. And what's the only picture they can show you of Jerusalem? The Dome of the Rock. That big gold dome that sits in Jerusalem. And remember, every time you see it, remember what that dome is. That dome is where God looked at the temple that was blocking people from God, blocking people from himself. And he said, no more. And he brought the Romans in and he flattened it. And he brought the Muslims in and they protected it. And he put the dome of the rock right on that old temple to seal it away forever from our purposes. Why? Because you are worthy to come into God's presence through Jesus Christ. You are just as worthy of being in God's presence as I am, as any of the elders are, as anybody you see on TV is. You are just as worthy as Billy Graham, Mother Teresa, or any other Christian throughout history. You're just as worthy of coming into the presence of God as Paul and anybody else who wrote part of the Bible. Not because of what you've done, but because of what Jesus has done as he went to the cross and he took everything you've ever done wrong on himself and he died, and then he said, I am going to bury your sin as deep as I can bury it, and then I'm going to put a seal as a symbol to remind you that you have no reason to think you need to go to some special place and become a special person and follow some set of rules in order for me to love you. I love you just the way you are. You don't need to stand outside and feel like you don't belong. You belong in my presence. So come on in.